Sarah Mitchell stepped off the military transport bus at Fort Harrison with her worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The October morning was crisp, and she could see her breath in small puffs as she surveyed the sprawling military installation that would be her new home. At 19, she looked younger than most recruits, with her petite frame and innocent face framed by shoulder-length brown hair that she kept neatly tucked behind her ears. The other new arrivals chatted nervously among themselves, but Sarah remained quiet, observing everything with sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She had learned long ago that it was better to watch and listen before making herself known. The military had taught her that, among other things. "All right, listen up," barked Sergeant Rodriguez, a stocky man with graying temples who had clearly been doing this orientation routine for years. "Welcome to Fort Harrison. This is where boys and girls become soldiers. Some of you will make it, some won't. Those who do will earn the right to serve alongside the finest military personnel in the world." Sarah suppressed a small smile. If only he knew. The group was led through the basic orientation process, medical checks, uniform distribution, and assignment to barracks. Sarah found herself assigned to Building C, Room 247, which she would share with 3 other female recruits. As they walked through the base, she noticed the layout with professional interest, automatically cataloging security checkpoints, communication towers, and the positioning of key buildings. Her roommates were already settling in when she arrived. There was Jessica, a loud blonde from Texas who seemed determined to befriend everyone immediately, Maria, a quiet girl from California who kept to herself, and Brittany, who had an air of superiority that immediately put Sarah on edge. "So you're the 4th roommate," Brittany said, looking Sarah up and down with obvious disdain. "You look like you're about 12. Are you sure you're old enough to be here?" Sarah simply nodded and began unpacking her few belongings into the small locker assigned to her. She had dealt with bullies before, and she knew that engaging too early would only make things worse. "I'm talking to you," Brittany pressed, stepping closer. She was taller than Sarah by several inches and clearly used to intimidating people with her presence. "I heard you," Sarah replied quietly, continuing to fold her civilian clothes. "I'm 19. Jessica laughed nervously. "Come on, Brittany, leave her alone. We're all new here." "Some of us are newer than others," Brittany said with a sneer. "Some of us look like we belong, and others." She gestured dismissively at Sarah. Maria glanced up from her own unpacking but said nothing. Sarah could feel the tension in the room building, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned patience in places these girls couldn't imagine. The first few days of basic training were a whirlwind of early morning wake-up calls, physical training, classroom instruction, and endless drills. Sarah performed adequately in everything, not standing out as exceptional, but not falling behind either. She had learned to blend in, to be competent but unremarkable. Her drill instructor was Sergeant First Class Thompson, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who seemed to take particular pleasure in pushing the female recruits to their limits. During their first PT session, Sarah watched as several of her fellow trainees struggled with the physical demands. "Move it, Mitchell!" Thompson shouted as Sarah completed her push-ups. "This isn't summer camp." Sarah increased her pace slightly but was careful not to show her true capabilities. She could have easily outperformed most of the male recruits, let alone the women, but drawing that kind of attention would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Brittany, meanwhile, struggled with almost every aspect of training. She was slow during runs, weak during strength exercises, and constantly complained about the conditions. Her frustration seemed to increase daily, and she began taking it out on anyone she perceived as weaker than herself. "Look at little Sarah," Brittany whispered loudly to a group of recruits during chow time. "Probably misses her mommy. Bet she cries herself to sleep every night." Sarah ignored the comment and continued eating her meal methodically. She had endured far worse than schoolyard taunts. But Brittany wasn't content with verbal harassment. As the days passed, she began escalating her behavior. Sarah would find her belongings moved or hidden, her bed sheets untucked after she had made them, small items missing from her locker. It was petty harassment designed to frustrate and intimidate. During their second week, the harassment took a more serious turn. Sarah was coming out of the shower late one evening when she found Brittany and 2 other recruits, Ashley and Morgan, blocking her path back to the barracks. Well, Brittany said, crossing her arms. If it isn't our little princess. You know, some of us are getting tired of your attitude. Sarah wrapped her towel more securely around herself and tried to step around them. Ashley moved to block her path. We're talking to you, Morgan said. She was a larger girl with short red hair and arms that suggested she had done manual labor before enlisting. Brittany asked you a question. I don't recall hearing a question, Sarah replied calmly. Brittany's face flushed with anger. See? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You think you're better than us, don't you? Walking around here all quiet and mysterious, like you know something we don't. I don't think I'm better than anyone, Sarah said honestly. Liar, Brittany spat. You look down on all of us. Well, let me tell you something, princess. You're nothing special. You're weak, you're small, and you don't belong here. Sarah remained silent, which only seemed to infuriate Brittany more. Say something. Brittany shouted, shoving Sarah backward. Sarah stumbled but maintained her balance, her training kicking in automatically to help her stay upright. I don't want any trouble, Sarah said quietly. Too bad, Ashley said with a cruel grin. Trouble found you. The 3 girls began closing in, and Sarah realized that this was about to escalate beyond simple harassment. She quickly calculated her options. She could defend herself easily, given her training, but that would raise questions about her background that she wasn't ready to answer. She could try to de-escalate, but Brittany seemed determined to make this physical. Before she could decide, footsteps echoed in the hallway behind the 3 girls. They turned to see Sergeant Thompson approaching, her expression stern. What's going on here? Thompson demanded. Nothing, Sergeant, Brittany said quickly, stepping back. We were just talking. Thompson's eyes moved between the 4 girls, clearly sensing the tension. Her gaze lingered on Sarah, who was still clutching her towel and trying to look smaller than she was. Mitchell, are these recruits bothering you? Sarah hesitated for a moment. She could report them, but that would likely make things worse in the long run. Bullies like Brittany didn't respond well to authority intervention, they just became more careful about when and where they struck. No, Sergeant, Sarah said finally. We were just talking. Thompson's expression suggested she didn't believe it for a second, but she nodded curtly. Then, I suggest you all return to your quarters. Lights out is in 30 minutes. The group dispersed, but Sarah could feel Brittany's hostile gaze burning into her back as she walked away. She knew this wasn't over. In fact, it was probably just beginning. Back in her room, Jessica was already in her bunk reading a magazine. She looked up as Sarah entered. Everything okay? You look upset. I'm fine, Sarah replied, gathering her toiletries to brush her teeth. Brittany's been giving you a hard time, hasn't she? Sarah paused. Jessica seemed genuinely concerned, but Sarah had learned not to trust too easily. It's nothing I can't handle. You know, you don't have to put up with that stuff. There are people you can talk to. Thanks, Sarah said, meaning it. But, really, I'm okay. As she lay in her narrow bunk that night, Sarah stared at the ceiling and thought about her situation. She had been in worse places, faced more dangerous enemies. But this was different. Here, she had to maintain her cover, which meant she couldn't use the skills that had kept her alive in other circumstances. Her phone buzzed softly with a text message. She glanced at it quickly, making sure her roommates were asleep. Status report. The message was from a number she didn't recognize, but she knew who it was from. She typed back carefully, proceeding as planned. No complications. It wasn't entirely true, but the complications she was facing weren't the kind that threatened the mission. They were just the petty cruelties that happened when people with limited power tried to exert dominance over others they perceived as vulnerable. The response came quickly: maintain cover. Phase 2 begins next month. Sarah deleted both messages and put her phone away. Phase 2 would change everything, but, until then, she had to endure whatever Brittany and her friends had planned for her. She just hoped she could continue to resist the urge to show them exactly how wrong they were about her being weak and defenseless. The next morning brought new challenges. During PT, Brittany made sure to accidentally trip Sarah during their morning run, causing her to stumble and fall behind the group. Later, during weapons training, Ashley knocked over Sarah's carefully arranged equipment, earning her a reprimand from the instructor. Through it all, Sarah maintained her composure. She helped others when she could, followed orders without complaint, and tried to stay invisible. But she could feel the situation building towards something more serious, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could maintain her facade of helplessness. The breaking point came sooner than she expected. During their third week, the recruits were given their first weekend pass. Most planned to visit the nearby town or call family members. Sarah had different plans. She needed to attend a classified briefing that was crucial to her real mission at Fort Harrison. She told her roommates she was going to visit a sick aunt in the next town over, which explained why she would be gone overnight. It was a simple cover story that she thought would attract no suspicion. She was wrong. Brittany had been watching Sarah more closely than she realized, and something about the way Sarah carried herself, the confidence in her posture when she thought no one was looking, had caught Brittany's attention. When Sarah left the base that Saturday morning with a small overnight bag, Brittany decided to follow her. What Brittany saw that day would change everything, though she didn't understand what she was witnessing at the time. She followed Sarah to what appeared to be an ordinary office building in town, but the people Sarah met with were clearly not ordinary civilians. There was something about their bearing, their alertness, the way they constantly scanned their surroundings, that suggested they were military, but not regular military. Brittany couldn't get close enough to hear what was being discussed, but she saw Sarah in the conference room, clearly comfortable and engaged with these mysterious people. The quiet, submissive girl from the barracks was nowhere to be seen. This Sarah sat with perfect posture, spoke with authority, and was obviously being treated with respect by people who looked like they could be special forces operators. When Sarah returned to base Sunday evening, Brittany was waiting for her, along with Ashley and Morgan. But now there was something different in Brittany's expression, not just bullying cruelty, but a kind of suspicious anger. "Have a nice time visiting your sick aunt?" Brittany asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yes," Sarah replied simply, sensing the trap but not understanding its nature. "Funny thing," Brittany continued, stepping closer. "I have a friend who works in town, and she mentioned seeing someone who looked a lot like you going into some kind of government building. Strange place to visit a sick relative, don't you think?" Sarah's blood went cold, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Brittany said, her voice low and threatening. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. The question is, what are you really doing here, Sarah Mitchell? Because I don't think you're just another recruit trying to serve her country." The accusation hung in the air between them. Sarah realized that her carefully constructed cover was beginning to unravel, and it was happening at the worst possible time. In just 1 week, phase 2 of her mission would begin, and everything depended on her maintaining her position at Fort Harrison. But Brittany wasn't finished. "I'm going to find out what you're hiding," she said with a cold smile. "And when I do, everyone on this base is going to know exactly what kind of liar you really are." As Brittany and her followers walked away, Sarah stood alone in the hallway, her mind racing. She had faced enemy soldiers, terrorists, and dangerous criminals without flinching, but now she was being threatened by a jealous bully who had accidentally stumbled onto something she couldn't be allowed to pursue. For the first time since arriving at Fort Harrison, Sarah began to consider that she might have to abandon her cover and reveal who she really was. The question was whether she could afford to do that and still complete her mission. The war between Sarah and Brittany was about to begin in earnest, and neither of them fully understood what the other was capable of. But Sarah had a feeling that before this was over, everyone at Fort Harrison would know exactly who commanded their respect and why. Sarah spent the next 3 days walking on eggshells, knowing that Brittany was watching her every move and looking for ammunition to use against her. During training exercises, she caught Brittany whispering to other recruits, pointing in her direction, and spreading what could only be suspicions about her true identity. The situation became more complicated when Staff Sergeant Williams, one of the senior drill instructors, began paying unusual attention to Sarah's performance. She noticed him watching her during PT sessions, studying her form during weapons training, and asking seemingly casual questions about her background. "Mitchell," he called out after a particularly challenging obstacle course run where Sarah had been forced to slow down to avoid standing out too much. "A word." Sarah jogged over to where Williams stood with his clipboard, trying to look appropriately winded despite barely being out of breath. "Your performance has been interesting," Williams said, his weathered face giving nothing away. "Sometimes you show flashes of real capability, other times you seem to struggle with basic tasks. It's almost like you're holding back." "I'm doing my best, Staff Sergeant," Sarah replied, maintaining the slightly uncertain tone she had cultivated since arriving. Williams studied her for a long moment. "Are you, Mitchell?" "Because I've been training recruits for 15 years, and I've never seen someone with your particular pattern of performance. Either you're the most inconsistent soldier I've ever met, or you're deliberately underperforming." Sarah felt a bead of sweat that had nothing to do with physical exertion roll down her back. "I don't understand, Staff Sergeant." "Don't you?" Williams leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Let me tell you what I see, Mitchell. I see someone who knows how to move like a trained operator but pretends to stumble. I see someone who handles weapons with familiarity but acts like she's never held one before. Most interesting of all, I see someone who automatically takes tactical positions during exercises but tries to cover it up by looking confused afterward." Before Sarah could respond, Williams stepped back and spoke in his normal commanding voice. "Whatever game you're playing, Mitchell, remember that this is the United States Army. We don't have time for games here. Either step up or ship out." As Williams walked away, Sarah realized her problems were multiplying rapidly. Not only was Brittany suspicious and actively working against her, but now she was drawing unwanted attention from the training staff. Her ability to maintain her cover was being tested from multiple angles. That evening, the situation exploded. Sarah was in the common area of their barracks building, reading a manual for the next day's training when Brittany approached with a larger group than usual. Ashley and Morgan were there, but they had been joined by 4 other recruits, including 2 of the larger male trainees, Derek and Kevin. Well, Brittany announced loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. "If it isn't our mysterious little princess. Tell me, Sarah, how was your visit to that government building last weekend?" The room went quiet. Several other recruits looked up from their own activities, sensing drama brewing. "I visited my aunt," Sarah said quietly, not looking up from her manual. "Your aunt works in a secure government facility?" Derek asked with a laugh. "Must be some family you come from." Sarah finally looked up, her green eyes moving calmly from face to face. She could see that Brittany had been working on these recruits for days, feeding them suspicions and half-truths to turn them against her. "I don't know what Brittany told you," Sarah said, "but I'm here for the same reason you all are. To serve my country." "Bullshit," Brittany spat. "I saw you in that building, talking to people who looked like special ops. You were sitting at that table like you owned the place, not like some scared little girl visiting her sick aunt." More recruits had gathered now, drawn by the confrontation. Sarah could see Jessica across the room, looking worried, and Maria had stopped pretending to read her book. "You want to know what I think?" Brittany continued, stepping closer. "I think you're some kind of spy. Maybe you're here to report on us, or test us, or some other sneaky government bullshit. But what you're not is one of us." "That's ridiculous," Sarah said, but she could see doubt creeping into the faces around her. Brittany had chosen her accusations carefully in an environment where recruits were already paranoid about being evaluated and judged. The suggestion that one of them might be an undercover observer was particularly poisonous. Kevin, a large recruit from Alabama with arms like tree trunks, stepped forward. "You know what? I always thought there was something off about you. You're too calm, too quiet. Normal people don't act like that under stress." "Maybe we should find out what she's really made of," Derek suggested with an ugly grin. "See if she's as tough as she pretends to be." Sarah felt the mood in the room shifting dangerously. What had started as bullying was escalating towards something much more serious. She glanced toward the exit, calculating distances and obstacles, her training automatically assessing threats and escape routes. "I don't want any trouble," she said, standing slowly and closing her manual. "Too late for that," Brittany said. "You should have thought about that before you started lying to all of us." "What's going on here?" The voice belonged to Corporal Jackson, a young non-commissioned officer who served as one of the evening supervisors. The crowd of recruits immediately began to disperse, but Brittany wasn't finished. "Nothing, Corporal," Brittany said with false innocence. "We were just having a conversation with Mitchell here about honesty and trust." Jackson's eyes moved between Brittany and Sarah, clearly sensing the underlying tension. "Mitchell, is there a problem?" Sarah hesitated. She could report the harassment, but that would likely lead to an investigation that might uncover details about her background she couldn't afford to reveal. On the other hand, if she didn't do something to defuse the situation, it was going to keep escalating. "No problem, Corporal," she said finally. Jackson didn't look convinced, but, without a formal complaint, there wasn't much he could do. "All right, but I want everyone back in their quarters. Lights out is in 1 hour." As the group began to break up, Brittany leaned close to Sarah and whispered, "This isn't over. We're going to find out what you're hiding, one way or another." Back in their room, Jessica immediately cornered Sarah. What was all that about? What government building was Brittany talking about? Sarah sat on her bunk and rubbed her temples. "It's complicated." "Try me," Jessica said, sitting across from her. "Look, I know we haven't known each other long, but I can tell you're not what you seem. And, after watching Brittany work herself up over you for weeks, I'm starting to think maybe there's a reason for that." Sarah looked at her roommate carefully. Jessica had been nothing but kind since they arrived, but trust was a luxury Sarah couldn't afford. Sometimes people see conspiracies where none exist. And, sometimes, Maria said quietly from her bunk, people are exactly what they appear to be until they're not. It was the most words Maria had spoken since they arrived, and both Sarah and Jessica turned to look at her in surprise. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jessica asked. Maria closed her book and looked directly at Sarah. "It means that some of us notice things. Like how you never seem tired after PT, even though you pretend to be. Or how you always know where exits are, even in buildings you've never been in before. Or how you hold yourself like someone who's used to being in charge, even though you act submissive." Sarah felt her stomach drop. If Maria had noticed these things, how many others had as well? "You're imagining things," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Maria said with a small smile. "Or maybe you're not the only one here who isn't exactly what they seem." Before Sarah could ask what that meant, the lights-out whistle blew, plunging the room into darkness. But Sarah lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and realizing that her situation was becoming untenable. The next morning brought a new crisis. During the early PT formation, Staff Sergeant Williams approached Sarah with a grave expression. "Mitchell, report to Colonel Henderson's office immediately after morning chow." The announcement sent a ripple of whispers through the assembled recruits. Colonel Henderson was the base commander, and a summons to his office was never routine for a basic trainee. Sarah felt Brittany's eyes on her as she acknowledged the order. Whatever Brittany had set in motion, it was now reaching the highest levels of command. 3 hours later, Sarah stood at attention outside Colonel Henderson's office, her mind racing through possible explanations and cover stories. When she was finally called in, she found not just the colonel, but 2 other people she didn't recognize, a woman in civilian clothes and a man in an army uniform with insignia she couldn't immediately identify. "At ease, Mitchell," Colonel Henderson said. He was a distinguished man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone who had seen combat. "Please, have a seat." Sarah sat in the chair indicated, keeping her posture straight and her expression neutral. "Mitchell," the colonel began, "we've received some interesting reports about your behavior and background. Reports that suggest you might not be entirely forthcoming about your reasons for being here." Sarah's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. I don't understand, sir. The woman in civilian clothes leaned forward. Let me be more direct, Miss Mitchell. We know you left base last weekend to attend a meeting that had nothing to do with visiting a sick relative. We know you've displayed skills and knowledge that far exceed what any basic trainee should possess. And we know that someone with your exact name and background doesn't exist in any database we can access. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. Her cover was blown, but she still wasn't sure how much they knew or what they suspected. The question, the unknown military officer said, is whether you're going to continue this charade, or whether you're going to tell us who you really are and what you're doing at Fort Harrison. Sarah looked between the three faces staring at her, realizing that her mission hung in the balance. Everything she had worked for over the past month was about to be exposed, and she had to decide whether to maintain her cover or reveal the truth. But before she could speak, Colonel Henderson's phone rang. He answered it curtly, his expression growing increasingly serious as he listened. When? He asked sharply. How many? I see. We'll be right there. He hung up and looked at his companions with an expression Sarah couldn't read. Gentlemen, ma'am, he said formally, I'm afraid this interview will have to be postponed. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. The woman frowned. Colonel, this matter is time-sensitive. We need to resolve Mitchell's status. I understand, Henderson replied, but what I just learned changes the priority considerably. Mitchell, you're dismissed for now, but consider yourself confined to base until further notice. As Sarah left the office, she could hear urgent, hushed conversations beginning behind her. Something major had happened, but she had no idea what it was or how it might affect her precarious situation. She was about to find out that the attack Brittany had been planning was nothing compared to what was coming for Fort Harrison itself. Walking back to her barracks, Sarah passed groups of soldiers moving with unusual urgency. Officers were being called to emergency meetings, and she could see increased activity at the communications center. Whatever had interrupted her interrogation was serious enough to put the entire base on alert. But her immediate concern was more personal. As she approached her building, she saw Brittany waiting for her with an expression of triumphant malice. Well, Brittany called out loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. How did your meeting with the Brasco, Princess? Did you tell them the truth about who you really are, or are you still playing your little games? Sarah tried to walk past without engaging, but Derek and Kevin emerged from behind the building, blocking her path. You know what I think happened up there? Brittany continued, moving closer. I think they finally figured out what a liar you are. I think they're getting ready to kick you out of here in disgrace. You don't know what you're talking about, Sarah said quietly. Don't I? Brittany's voice rose. Then, why don't you explain it to all of us? Tell us who you really are, Sarah Mitchell. Tell us why you were meeting with special ops types in town. Tell us why you act like you know more than you're letting on. A crowd was gathering again, just like the night before, but this time the mood was more aggressive. Brittany had been working on them, feeding their suspicions and resentments, turning them against someone they now saw as a threat to their group. Maybe she's a terrorist, someone suggested from the crowd. Maybe she's here to sabotage the base. Or maybe she's a spy from another country, Ashley added. That would explain the government building. Sarah felt the situation spiraling completely out of control. The accusations were getting more serious and more dangerous, and she could see real hostility in the faces around her. I'm an American soldier, just like all of you, she said, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable. Prove it, Derek demanded, stepping closer. If you're just a regular soldier, then you won't mind if we search your stuff. See what secrets you're hiding. You can't just search someone's personal belongings, Jessica's voice cut through the crowd. She had emerged from the building and was pushing her way toward Sarah. This is harassment, and it needs to stop. Stay out of this, Jessica, Brittany warned. Unless you're part of whatever she's up to. I'm part of stopping a bunch of bullies from attacking someone based on paranoid fantasies, Jessica shot back. The confrontation was reaching a boiling point when the base-wide announcement system crackled to life. All personnel, this is Colonel Henderson. Fort Harrison is now under Condition Red. All non-essential personnel are to report to designated shelter areas immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The crowd of recruits looked around in confusion and growing alarm. Condition Red meant the base was under imminent threat of attack, but from what? And why now? As sirens began wailing across the installation, Sarah realized that whatever was happening was about to change everything. The personal drama between her and Brittany suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the crisis that was about to engulf Fort Harrison. But, as the recruits began scattering to follow emergency protocols, Brittany grabbed Sarah's arm. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Whatever's happening, once it's done, we're going to finish what we started. You're going to tell us the truth, one way or another." Sarah looked into Brittany's eyes and saw something she recognized from other conflicts in other places. The look of someone who had chosen an enemy and would pursue them regardless of consequences or evidence. As the base around them erupted into controlled chaos, Sarah realized that the real war was just beginning, and she was going to have to fight it on two fronts: against whatever external threat had triggered Condition Red, and against the internal enemies who were determined to destroy her cover and expose her mission. The question was whether she could win both battles without revealing who she really was and what kind of power she actually commanded at Fort Harrison. The emergency sirens continued wailing as recruits and personnel scrambled to reach their designated shelter areas. Sarah found herself swept along with the crowd toward the underground bunker complex beneath the main administration building, but her mind was racing with possibilities about what could have triggered Condition Red. As they filed into the concrete corridors below ground, Sarah's phone buzzed with a coded message that made her blood run cold. "Phoenix compromised. Immediate extraction protocols in effect. Maintain cover until contact." Phoenix was her operation code name. Someone had blown her mission, and now everything was falling apart simultaneously. The external threat, whatever it was, couldn't be coincidental timing. The recruits were herded into a large briefing room where fold-out chairs had been hastily arranged. Nervous chatter filled the space as everyone tried to understand what was happening. Sarah found herself seated near the back, with Brittany and her followers unfortunately close by. "Attention!" Staff Sergeant Williams entered the room, followed by several other senior NCOs. "I need everyone to remain calm and follow instructions precisely. Fort Harrison is currently under threat from an unknown hostile force that has penetrated our outer security perimeter." Gasps and worried murmurs rippled through the room. Sarah noticed that Williams avoided making eye contact with her, which suggested that her compromised status was now known throughout the command structure. At approximately 1,400 hours, Williams continued, "Our surveillance systems detected a team of armed individuals moving through the western sector. Initial contact with our security patrols resulted in casualties. The intruders appear to be highly trained and well-equipped." Sarah's tactical mind immediately began analyzing the situation. A coordinated attack on a military installation required significant planning, resources, and intelligence about base defenses. This wasn't random terrorism, it was a targeted operation. "All personnel will remain in designated shelter areas until the threat is neutralized," Williams announced. "Under no circumstances is anyone to leave these areas without direct authorization from a commissioned officer." As Williams left with the other NCOs, the room erupted in anxious conversation. Sarah sat quietly, trying to process the implications of what was happening. Her mission had been compromised, the base was under attack, and she was trapped in a room full of panicked recruits including her personal enemies. "Well, this is convenient," Brittany said loudly enough for several people to hear. "The mysterious spy girl is here when the base gets attacked. What are the odds?" Derek nodded grimly. "Maybe this whole thing is because of her. Maybe whoever she's working for is coming to get her." "That's insane," Jessica protested, but Sarah could see doubt creeping into her expression. "Is it?" Ashley chimed in. "Think about it. She shows up here acting all innocent, but she's meeting with government agents and acting suspicious. Now suddenly, we're under attack by some mysterious force? That's not a coincidence. Sarah realized with growing alarm that Brittany was successfully turning the crisis into ammunition against her. The recruits were scared and looking for someone to blame, and she had been perfectly positioned as a convenient scapegoat. You know what? Brittany stood up, her voice carrying across the room. I think we all deserve to know the truth about who we're sheltering with. Sarah Mitchell, or whoever you really are, I think it's time you came clean about why you're really here. More heads turned towards Sarah as Brittany's voice drew attention from across the room. She could see suspicion and fear mixing in the faces around her. I'm here for the same reason you are, Sarah said calmly, but she could hear how unconvincing it sounded even to her own ears. Bullshit, Kevin said, standing to join Brittany. Real soldiers don't act like you do. Real soldiers don't meet with spooks on weekends and lie about it. And real soldiers don't just happen to be here when the base gets attacked by professionals, Morgan added, also rising from her chair. Sarah looked around and saw that the mood in the room was shifting dangerously against her. Fear and uncertainty were being channeled into anger and suspicion, with her as the focal point. This is ridiculous, Maria said suddenly, speaking up from across the room. You're all letting panic make you stupid. Stay out of this, Maria, Brittany snapped. Unless you know something about your roommate that the rest of us don't. Maria stood slowly, and Sarah was surprised to see a confidence in her posture that hadn't been there before. Maybe I do. Maybe there are things about this situation that you're too ignorant to understand. What's that supposed to mean? Derek demanded. Before Maria could answer, the light suddenly went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting airy red shadows across the concrete walls. What the hell? Someone shouted. Stay calm. William's voice came from the doorway as he reappeared with a flashlight. We've lost main power to this section. Emergency generators are operating, but we need to move everyone to a more secure location. As people began standing and moving toward the exit, Sarah felt someone grab her arm in the darkness. She tensed, ready to defend herself, but a familiar voice whispered urgently in her ear. Phoenix, this is Raven. Time to go. Sarah turned and saw Maria beside her, but the scared recruit persona was completely gone. The woman next to her moved with the controlled precision of a trained operator, and her eyes held the hard alertness of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. Maria? Sarah whispered, confused. Agent Martinez, actually. I've been your backup since day one. We need to extract you now, before this gets worse. Sarah's mind reeled. Her roommate had been undercover federal protection the entire time, watching over her mission without her knowledge. The attack? Sarah asked quietly as they moved with the crowd toward the exit. Real, but not random. Someone leaked details about Phoenix operation. They're here for you, and they're willing to level this whole base to get you. As they reached the corridor, Williams was directing people toward another shelter area deeper in the complex. Sarah saw Brittany watching her intently, still suspicious despite the chaos around them. We can't just leave, Sarah said. These people are in danger because of me. Your mission is more important than a training base, Martinez replied curtly. Orders are to extract you immediately. Sarah hesitated. Everything in her training told her to follow extraction protocols, but, looking at the frightened faces of the recruits around her, even including Brittany and her group, she couldn't just abandon them to face an attack that was ultimately her responsibility. I need 2 minutes, she told Martinez. Before Martinez could object, Sarah broke away from the group and approached Staff Sergeant Williams. Sergeant, she said quietly, I need to speak with Colonel Henderson immediately. Williams looked at her with suspicion and anger. Mitchell, you're supposed to be with the other recruits. Sergeant, people are going to die unless I can talk to the colonel right now. I know things about this attack that could help. Something in her tone must have convinced him, because Williams spoke into his radio. Control, this is Williams. I need an immediate channel to Colonel Henderson. Yes, it's about Mitchell. A moment later, Henderson's voice crackled through the radio.
Put her on. Williams handed Sarah the radio with obvious reluctance.
Colonel, this is Sarah Mitchell. The attack on this base is connected to me, and I need authorization to take action to protect these personnel. There was a long pause before Henderson responded. Mitchell, or whoever you are, you're confined to shelter areas.
This is not negotiable.
Sir, with respect, confining me is what's going to get people killed. The attackers are here for me, which means they know exactly where I am. They're not going to stop until they get me or until this entire facility is neutralized.
Another pause.
What are you suggesting? Sarah looked around at the scared faces surrounding her, recruits who had signed up to serve their country but never expected to face combat in a training facility. Even Brittany was looking frightened now, her earlier bravado replaced by genuine fear. I'm suggesting you let me do what I was trained for, Sarah said.
Give me authorization to engage these hostiles and end this threat. Mitchell, you're a basic trainee.
I can't authorize, Colonel, Sarah interrupted, dropping all pretense. My name is Captain Sarah Mitchell, United States Army Special Operations Command. I'm here on a classified mission that requires Level 7 clearance to discuss. The attack on your base is a direct result of my cover being compromised, and I'm requesting permission to protect your personnel by any means necessary. The silence that followed was deafening. Even through the radio, she could sense the shock her revelation had caused.
Williams stared at her in amazement.
Around them, recruits who had overheard were looking at her with expressions ranging from confusion to awe. Brittany's face had gone completely white. Captain, she whispered. Henderson's voice came back over the radio, tight with controlled anger.
Captain Mitchell, this is highly irregular.
I wasn't informed that we had a special operations officer operating undercover at my facility. Sir, the operation was classified above your clearance level.
But circumstances have changed.
I need to know the current tactical situation and I need access to my equipment. Another pause, then, Williams, escort Captain Mitchell to the command center.
Everyone else remains in shelter.
As Williams led her away from the group, Sarah could hear the explosion of whispered conversations behind her. Her cover was blown completely now, but it no longer mattered. The mission had failed, and now her priority was keeping these people alive.
Captain, Williams said as they walked rapidly through the corridors, I have to ask, was this all some kind of test? Were you evaluating our training program?
No, Sarah replied grimly. I was here investigating potential security breaches in our special operations recruitment pipeline. Someone has been identifying and targeting our deep cover operatives, and Fort Harrison was being used as a testing ground for new insertion techniques. They reached the command center, where Sarah found organized chaos. Officers were coordinating response to multiple breach points, and tactical displays showed the positions of hostile forces throughout the base. Colonel Henderson looked up as she entered, his expression a mixture of anger and grudging respect.
Captain Mitchell.
I assume you're prepared to explain how your presence here has put my people in danger. Sir, I was investigating security leaks that were getting our people killed. Someone identified me and decided to use this base as a trap. The hostiles out there are professional operators, probably foreign agents or mercenaries, and they won't stop until they get me or eliminate all witnesses.
How many? Henderson asked curtly.
Based on the breach patterns, I'd estimate a minimum of 12, possibly 20. They'll have divided into teams to cover all exit routes and shelter areas. Sarah studied the tactical display, her mind automatically processing the enemy positions and movements. These weren't random terrorists, they were moving with the precision and coordination of special forces operators. Colonel, I need my gear and I need a small team of volunteers. I can end this, but I need to go on the offensive.
Henderson looked at her for a long moment.
Captain, you're asking me to let a compromised officer take action that could result in casualties among my personnel.
Sir, I'm telling you that if we stay defensive, you're going to lose people anyway. These operators didn't come here to take prisoners.
They came to eliminate a threat and anyone who might have learned about it. Before Henderson could respond, a new voice cut through the command center chatter.
"Colonel, we have a problem."
Captain Torres, Henderson's intelligence officer, was standing at a communications console with a grim expression.
"What is it?" Henderson asked. "The hostiles have reached Shelter Area C. They're demanding that we turn over someone they're calling Phoenix or they start executing personnel."
Sarah felt her stomach drop.
Shelter Area C was where the recruits were being held.
"They have Brittany and the others," she said quietly. Henderson turned to her with a hard expression. "Captain Mitchell, it appears your war has come to my soldiers. I hope you're prepared to finish what you started."
Sarah nodded grimly. The time for hiding was over.
Now everyone was going to find out exactly what the quiet little recruit was capable of when the people under her protection were threatened. "Sir, I'll need access to my equipment cache and whatever tactical team you can spare."
"And, Colonel?"
"Yes?"
"Those recruits in Shelter Area C think I'm just a liar and a spy. They're about to learn that I'm something much more dangerous than that."
As Sarah prepared for combat, she thought about Brittany and the others who had tormented her for weeks, never knowing they were attacking someone whose job description included neutralizing threats to national security.
The irony would have been amusing if their lives weren't now hanging in the balance.
The scared little recruit was about to disappear forever, replaced by the special operations officer who had been hiding beneath the surface all along. And the people who had underestimated her were about to discover just how wrong they had been about who commanded the real power at Fort Harrison.
20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the equipment cache as a completely different person. Gone was the uncertain recruit in ill-fitting fatigues.
In her place stood a special operations officer in full tactical gear, moving with the lethal precision that had been hidden beneath weeks of careful misdirection. Her true equipment revealed the scope of her real mission: advanced communications gear, specialized weapons, and body armor that was far beyond standard military issue. The transformation was so complete that even Colonel Henderson did a double take when he saw her. "Captain Mitchell reporting for tactical briefing, sir," she said crisply. Henderson gestured to the tactical display. "The situation has deteriorated. The hostiles have consolidated their position around Shelter Area C and are using our people as leverage.
They're demanding we surrender Phoenix or they start executing personnel in 15-minute intervals."
Sarah studied the display, her mind automatically calculating angles of approach, defensive positions, and potential casualties. "Sir, I count at least 18 hostile positions based on these thermal readings. They've set up interlocking fields of fire and multiple fallback positions."
"Whoever planned this knew our facility layout intimately."
"Captain Torres has identified the leak," Henderson said grimly, nodding toward his intelligence officer.
Torres stepped forward with a tablet. "Staff Sergeant Williams has been passing information to an unknown contact for the past 6 months.
We believe he identified you during your first week of training and reported your presence." Sarah felt a chill of betrayal, but pushed the emotion aside. Personal feelings were a luxury she couldn't afford in combat situations.
"Has he been detained?" "Williams is currently with the hostiles," Henderson replied.
"It appears he was extracted when they breached the perimeter."
The pieces fell into place in Sarah's mind.
Williams had been watching her from the beginning, studying her performance and gradually realizing she wasn't what she seemed. His questions about her background and capabilities hadn't been routine training evaluation, they had been intelligence gathering for hostile forces. "Sir, we need to move immediately," Sarah said. "If Williams has told them everything he observed about me, they'll know I'm trained for close quarters combat and they'll be prepared for an assault."
"What do you recommend?" Henderson asked.
Sarah looked at the display again, noting the positions of friendly forces and potential approach routes.
"I need 2 things, sir.
First, I need every available personnel file on the recruits being held hostage.
Second, I need you to open communications with the hostiles." "Captain, we can't negotiate with." "I'm not negotiating, sir. I'm going to give them exactly what they want." Henderson frowned. "You're going to surrender?"
"I'm going to surrender Sarah Mitchell, the confused recruit who's been stumbling through basic training for the past month." What they're going to get is Captain Sarah Mitchell, Special Operations, and, by the time they realize the difference, it will be too late. Henderson looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly.
What do you need from me?
I need you to contact them and tell them that Phoenix is willing to exchange herself for the hostages.
Set up the exchange in the main corridor outside Shelter Area C.
And, sir, I need you to make sure all your personnel know that when the shooting starts, they need to stay down and let me work.
As Henderson began issuing orders, Sarah reviewed the personnel files Torres had provided.
She memorized the faces and names of every recruit being held, including Brittany, Ashley, Derek, and Kevin. Even Jessica and Maria were among the hostiles, though she knew Maria was probably looking for an opportunity to act. 25 minutes later, Sarah walked alone down the main corridor toward Shelter Area C. She had stripped off most of her tactical gear and was wearing basic fatigues again, but hidden beneath her clothing were weapons and equipment that would give her every advantage once the situation turned violent.
Her communications earpiece crackled with Henderson's voice. Phoenix, you have eyes on target.
Count 12 hostiles in your immediate area, with at least 6 more in overwatch positions.
Understood, Sarah replied quietly. Initiating contact.
As she approached the reinforced doors of the shelter area, a voice called out from the shadows.
That's far enough, Phoenix.
A man stepped into the light, and Sarah immediately recognized the professional bearing and equipment of a special operations soldier. Behind him, she could see other figures positioned strategically throughout the corridor. I'm here, Sarah said, raising her hand slightly.
Let the recruits go. The man smiled coldly. Oh, we intend to. But, first, we need to verify that you're really the person we're looking for.
Williams described you as a confused little girl playing soldier.
You don't look confused to me. Maybe I'm a better actress than you thought, Sarah replied. Maybe.
Or maybe you're exactly what we were told you were, a special operations officer who's been very naughty, investigating things that weren't your business. Another figure emerged from the shadows, and Sarah's blood ran cold when she recognized Staff Sergeant Williams.
His face was hard and unrepentant as he approached. Hello, Captain Mitchell, Williams said. Or do you prefer Phoenix? I have to admit, watching you try to blend in with the recruits was entertaining.
Especially watching that bitch Brittany torment someone who could have killed her with one hand tied behind her back.
Why? Sarah asked simply.
Williams shrugged.
Money, mostly. Do you know how much they pay drill sergeants? It's insulting.
These people offered me more for 6 months of intelligence gathering than the army pays me in 2 years.
And you were willing to sell out your own country for it?
I was willing to sell out an officer who thinks she's better than the rest of us, Williams snapped.
You and your special operations elite, with your classified missions and unlimited budgets. You want to play spy games? Fine.
But don't expect the rest of us to respect you for it.
The hostile leader gestured impatiently. Enough conversation. Phoenix, you're coming with us. Your little investigation ends here. Actually, Sarah said quietly, my investigation ended 3 weeks ago. The hostile leader frowned. What?
Sarah smiled, and, for the first time since arriving at Fort Harrison, she let her true nature show in her expression. The change was subtle but unmistakable, the uncertainty and deference disappeared, replaced by the cold confidence of someone accustomed to controlling life and death situations.
3 weeks ago, I identified Williams as the leak.
Everything since then has been setting up this moment. You see, I wasn't just investigating security breaches.
I was hunting the people responsible for them. Williams' face went pale. That's impossible. You're just a recruit.
You barely made it through basic training exercises. I barely made it through them because I was acting like a barely competent recruit, Sarah replied. It's called maintaining cover, something you apparently know nothing about. The hostile leader was reaching for his weapon when Sarah moved. Years of special operations training took over as she dropped low and rolled behind a concrete pillar. Her hidden pistol was in her hand before the first hostile could fully clear his weapon from its holster.
The corridor exploded into chaos as Sarah opened fire with precision that spoke to countless hours of combat training. Her first 3 shots took down the hostile leader and 2 of his companions before they could react. Her movements were fluid and controlled, nothing like the uncertain recruit who had struggled with basic weapons handling during training. Contact! Contact! Voices shouted as the remaining hostiles took cover and returned fire. But Sarah was no longer where they expected her to be. Moving with tactical precision, she used her knowledge of the base layout to outflank their positions. Each movement was calculated, each shot precisely aimed. "Henderson, this is Phoenix," she spoke into her concealed communicator. "Execute hammer protocols. All personnel maintain position until all clear." From her new position behind an equipment locker, Sarah could see the entrance to Shelter Area C. Through the reinforced glass, she caught a glimpse of the recruits huddled inside, including Brittany's shocked face pressed against the window. 3 more hostiles went down as Sarah systematically dismantled their defensive positions. These were trained professionals, but they had prepared to fight a confused recruit, not a special operations officer in her element. Williams was crouched behind an overturned table, shouting orders to the remaining hostiles. "She's just one person. Take her down." "One person who's been training for this her entire adult life," Sarah called out as she moved to another position. "Unlike you, Williams, I take my oath seriously." Her next shot took out a hostile who was trying to flank her position. The man dropped his weapon and fell, clutching his shoulder where Sarah's non-lethal shot had disabled him. "Surrender now," Sarah announced, her voice carrying clearly through the corridor. "You're outgunned and outmaneuvered. I can end this without any more casualties, or I can show you what special operations really means." 2 more hostiles broke cover, trying to rush her position. Sarah's response was swift and clinical. Both men went down with precise shots to their legs, disabled but alive. Williams stood up slowly, his hands raised. All right. Enough." Sarah emerged from cover, her weapon trained on him. Around the corridor, the surviving hostiles were either down or surrendering. "Williams," she said quietly, "you betrayed your oath, your country, and the soldiers under your command. But, worse than that, you put innocent recruits in danger to cover your own greed." "They're not innocent," Williams spat. "They're spoiled kids playing at being soldiers. Just like you were playing at being one of them." "The difference," Sarah replied, "is that I was playing a role to protect them. You were betraying them for money." Colonel Henderson's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Phoenix, we have cleanup teams moving to your position." "Outstanding work, Captain." Sarah kept her weapon trained on Williams as base security moved in to secure the remaining hostiles. As the immediate threat was neutralized, she finally allowed herself to think about what came next. The shelter area doors opened, and the recruits began emerging under guard. Sarah watched as Brittany, Ashley, Derek, Kevin, and the others walked out, their faces showing a mixture of shock, fear, and dawning understanding. Brittany approached slowly, her expression completely changed from the hostile bully who had tormented Sarah for weeks. "You're really a captain?" she asked quietly. "I'm really a captain," Sarah confirmed, holstering her weapon. "And you've been, what, babysitting us?" "I've been investigating security leaks that were getting our people killed. Your harassment was just background noise." Brittany looked at the scene around them, the disabled hostiles, the tactical precision with which Sarah had handled a life-threatening situation, the obvious respect she commanded from the base personnel. I'm sorry," Brittany said finally. "I thought you were. I mean, I didn't know." "You thought I was weak," Sarah said simply. "You thought you could push me around because I looked like an easy target. You never considered that maybe there was a reason I didn't push back." Derek stepped forward, his earlier hostility replaced by obvious awe. "Captain, what you just did, that was incredible. I've never seen anything like it." "That's what real training looks like," Sarah replied. "Not the basic training you've been going through, but the kind of training that takes years to master. The kind of training that requires absolute dedication to protecting others, even when they don't appreciate it." Jessica appeared from the crowd of recruits, her face showing relief and amazement. So all those times you let Brittany push you around, you could have stopped her?
I could have ended it in about 3 seconds, Sarah said. But that would have blown my cover and potentially cost lives.
Sometimes the hardest thing a soldier has to do is accept unfair treatment in service of a larger mission.
Colonel Henderson approached, flanked by several other officers. Captain Mitchell, we'll need a full debriefing, but I want to say that your actions today saved lives and neutralized a significant threat to this installation.
Thank you, sir.
But I should mention that Agent Martinez, who you know as Recruit Maria, provided excellent backup throughout this operation. She's also due recognition for her role in maintaining mission security. Maria stepped forward, and Sarah could see that she had also shed her recruit persona. The quiet, bookish girl was gone, replaced by a confident federal agent.
Agent Martinez, FBI, she said to the assembled group.
I've been working with Captain Mitchell to identify and neutralize the security breach that threatened special operations personnel throughout the region.
Brittany looked between Sarah and Maria with an expression of complete bewilderment. So both of you were, what, spies?
We were federal officers doing our jobs, Sarah corrected. Protecting the people and institutions that keep this country safe. Including training facilities like this one, and recruits like all of you.
Kevin shook his head in amazement.
And we thought you were the problem.
We thought you didn't belong here.
In a way, I didn't belong here, Sarah admitted. My real job is usually much more dangerous than basic training. But this mission was about protecting the next generation of soldiers, people like you who are willing to serve their country.
Williams was being led away in custody when he turned back toward Sarah. You think you've won something here? This was just one operation. There are others who know about you now. Your cover identity is blown permanently. Sarah looked at him calmly.
Williams, my cover identity was blown the moment you started selling information to foreign agents. The only question was whether I could use that fact to draw out the rest of your network.
Mission accomplished.
As Williams was taken away, Colonel Henderson addressed the assembled recruits. What you've witnessed today is classified at the highest levels. Captain Mitchell's presence here and the nature of her mission are not to be discussed outside this group.
Is that understood?
A chorus of yes, sir, echoed through the corridor.
Henderson nodded. Good.
Now, I think you all have a better understanding of what it really means to serve your country. Captain Mitchell has shown you that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people you'd never suspect, in places you'd never expect. As the group began to disperse for debriefing and medical evaluation, Brittany approached Sarah one more time. Captain, she said hesitantly, I know this probably doesn't matter now, but I really am sorry.
For everything.
I was jealous and scared and I took it out on you. Sarah studied the young woman who had made her life miserable for weeks. She could see genuine remorse in Brittany's eyes, along with a new understanding of what it meant to misjudge someone completely. Brittany, she said finally, you were doing what you thought was right based on the information you had. The problem is, you let fear and suspicion override evidence and common sense. That's a dangerous habit for a soldier.
Will you? I mean, is this going to affect our training records? Sarah smiled slightly.
Your training record will show that you performed adequately under extreme stress and followed orders during a crisis situation. What it won't show is that you learned the difference between strength and weakness, between confidence and arrogance.
Thank you, Brittany said quietly.
As the recruits were led away for debriefing, Sarah found herself alone in the corridor with Maria and Colonel Henderson.
So, Captain, Henderson said, what happens now? Do you disappear back into whatever classified world you came from?
Sarah looked around the base that had been her temporary home for the past month. Despite the harassment and the constant need to hide her true capabilities, she had grown fond of some of the people here.
Actually, sir, I have a recommendation.
This base needs better security protocols and enhanced training for identifying potential threats.
I'd like to volunteer to help develop those programs. Henderson raised an eyebrow. You want to stay? Even after everything that happened here?
Especially because of everything that happened here, Sarah replied. These recruits are going to be sent all over the world to serve in dangerous places. They need to understand that strength comes in many forms, and that the person next to them might be more capable than they appear.
And William's betrayal?
Williams forgot that our oath is to protect and serve others, not ourselves. These recruits need to understand that distinction before they become responsible for other people's lives.
Henderson nodded slowly.
I'll make the request through proper channels. I have a feeling that after today's events, your recommendations will carry significant weight. As Sarah walked back through the base that evening, she reflected on the events of the past month. She had come to Fort Harrison to investigate security breaches and had ended up learning as much about herself as about the threats she was hunting. The quiet recruit named Sarah Mitchell was gone forever, but in her place was an officer who better understood the responsibility that came with her capabilities and training. She had been tested not just in combat, but in the much more difficult arena of enduring unfair treatment while protecting those who were attacking her. Most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the greatest strength was knowing when not to use your power, and that the most important victories were the ones that protected others rather than advancing yourself. The recruits would go on to complete their training with a new understanding of what it meant to serve alongside people whose true capabilities might be hidden beneath unassuming exteriors. They would carry that lesson with them throughout their military careers, making them better soldiers and better leaders. And sometimes, late at night in bases around the world, they would tell the story of the new girl who seemed weak and defenseless until the moment when her true nature was revealed, and everyone learned that the person they had underestimated was actually the one who had been protecting them all along. The attack on Fort Harrison had been intended to eliminate a threat to enemy operations. Instead, it had created a new generation of soldiers who understood that real strength often came disguised as vulnerability, and that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who looked the least threatening. Sarah Mitchell, Special Operations Officer, had completed her mission. But, more than that, she had helped shape the future of American military leadership by teaching a crucial lesson about judgment, respect, and the hidden strengths that exist in every unit. As she settled into her new role at Fort Harrison, Sarah knew that her real work was just beginning. The recruits who had once seen her as weak would now learn from her as students, and they would be better soldiers for understanding that true command presence had nothing to do with intimidation and everything to do with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can protect those under your care. The story of the new girl who commanded the base would become legend, but the lessons it taught about leadership, strength, and service would continue shaping soldiers for generations to come.